Teach us to treasure each day. Teach us to treasure each day, that we may open our hearts to your wisdom. Oh, teach us to treasure each day, that we may open our hearts to your wisdom. Oh, teach us to treasure each day. Limnot yameinu, limnot yameinu, limnot yameinu, kein hoda v'navi elav chokhma. Limnot yameinu, kein hoda v'navi elav chokhma. Good evening. It's my privilege and joy to welcome you on behalf of the Chevra Kadesha and also on behalf of Congregation of Kadesha, whose home we are in. This room is our sanctuary. Is it on? It's on. Okay. It's a little closer. Okay. I didn't think I needed it since there were not that many people. This meeting tonight is an event that is usually scheduled in Chevra Kadesha because it is around the time of both the birth and death of Moshe Rabbeinu, our teacher Moses, and so it's traditional to have a learning session at this time of year. This year there are 2 months Adar, and so we're not celebrating it on the exact date of either the first or the second Adar, but somewhere in between. Jason's going to explain the exact structure of the evening, but I want to first of all welcome and thank our panelists,
such as we are,
Rabbi Nadia and Rabbi Tirza, and we're very sad that Mora Yehudis, who is scheduled to join us, is ill. However, she sent a message which Jason is going to read for us. And I want to also point out that if any of you are interested in joining us, if you're not already in the Chevra Kadesha, there's a sign-up sheet in the back, and Evie will explain what the various functions are that you would be signing up for. It's also traditional at this time of year, usually, for people to make a donation to the Chevra Kadesha, and there's also a donation basket back there for anyone who is so moved. So without further ado, I will give it to Jason.
So as Ruth said, I'm Jason. I'm part of the Chevra Kadesha leadership team. And Janet had the idea that we model tonight after CU's Conference of World Affairs. And it occurred to us afterwards that it's perfect. We have Olam Hazeh, this world, and Olam Haba, and we're interested in the affairs between the two. So with that, what we'll do is we will have some time for Nadia and Tirza to each individually share teaching stories that we've asked around the topic for them to reflect on and bring to us. And then we'll have some time for them to respond to each other's remarks and enter into some dialogue, at which point I might help prompt some of that discussion. And then we'll open it up and we'll have a significant amount of time for Q&A. So please, as you're listening here, listen also inside for questions you have and or questions that you've brought here before. And they don't have to be exactly on the topic tonight, but bring them in. Your genuine questions will be really helpful for the whole community to hear. So really quickly before we move there, I want to pass on some of what I got from Reb Zalman around Chevra Kadesha. I had the good fortune at one point to interview him around his experience of Chevra Kadesha in the old country before he came over. And as you know, him and his father are Kohanim, so they couldn't participate and be full members in the Chevra with Tahara and Shmirah. So his father, though, so badly wanted to be part of the mitzvah of Chesed Shel Emes, this truest act of loving kindness. So he was doing anything he could to get as close as he could to be part of that. So there was a Hasidic Chevra Kadesha in Vienna, and on Shabbos morning they held 2 minyanim from 8 to 10 and 10 to 12. And Reb Zalman's dad would go daven with the early one, just so he could then say, as Reb Zalman said, just so he could go there and he could say Amen, 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 and just be really part of that. And then he became their Gabbai Rishon, and he started handling their books and doing other kinds of duties. So when he told me, I just thought it was such a beautiful example of how we're so fortunate to even be able to do this. And his father, just if we really understood what it really meant, this Chesed Shel Emes, we really understood what that meant, that what we're doing. Another little piece is that apparently, this goes further back from Reb Zalman's time, is that the junior members of Chevra Kadesha in the burial societies in Europe, in some of those communities, this junior member would go around and invite people, go house to house and invite people to this banquet, this evening feast, because this is traditionally a fast day, the Day of Atonement, and the Chevra would go out to the cemetery and ask for forgiveness for any ways that they hadn't honored the deceased, and then break the fast in the evening. But we're not doing it as a feast. Feast on knowledge, on Torah instead. So apparently this junior member would go around in some of the communities with a shovel, door to door, and other burial utensils, as a reminder of the inevitability of death. So I thought about this, that when we send you emails, in case you're ever irritated, just remember at least we're not coming door to door with you with a shovel. We're so lucky to have Reb Tirza, Reb Nadja. They're truly teachers on all 4 worlds. Really think about it: the body, emotions, the heart, the mind, intellect, knowledge, and spirit. It's rare, I think, to have this combination, so we're so blessed to have you here. Thank you so much for coming. And we've asked an impossible question of them, which is, how does the work of the Chevra, this sitting shmirah, this guarding and protecting the soul, and this water purification ritual of tahara, and this dressing in the tafrachim, how is all this valuable and helpful to the neshama of the deceased? So I'm sure they're going to be riffing off of this, right? Because we can talk about how it's valuable for the mourners and those left behind, and not just for the neshama who's gone, and how it's valuable for Chevra Kadesha members, etc. But that's the question we posed. So I'd like to just invite that you can decide who goes first. But before we even begin, would you just introduce really briefly what you're doing in your life right now, and what's been your connection, just briefly, and what's been your connection to this death and dying work? And we know that they're not going to be fully disclosing thoroughly, partly because we don't have time, but also because a lot of this work, there's a humility and there's a kind of keeping it inside. But let's start there, whoever would like to start.
Gosh, I think that my story is known to everyone, but what I'm doing right now is really working extensively for the movement of Jewish renewal, and specific to this work. I've been studying for the last year and a half at Chavruta. I've been doing some Chavruta with Simcha Raphael, who's the author of Journey to Soul, or Jewish, what is it called?
Views of the Afterlife.
Jewish Views of the Afterlife. And we're collaborating in developing a program through Aleph that will begin with the end-of-life doula training that I started years ago, and take it through the work of the Chevra Kadesha and grief work, and train people in the fullness of that work. So that's been a very exciting project that I've been able to be involved with in the last year and a half, and hopefully will come to fruition in the next year or 2 or 3. But I want to say that this work started for me, my interest, my growing awareness, and my commitment to the work started with the death of my father. And today, this past day that now ended by our cycle, was my father's 35th yahrzeit.
Wow.
So it's been 35 years since I came to the reality that, the realization that there are no promises. Life can end at any moment for no good reason, and I'm might as well be prepared. And that started me on the journey to understand mortality, what that means for me, and also a journey of a relationship with my father's neshama, which only grows year to year. So if you've read the book Tuesdays with Maury or seen the film that was made, one of my favorite lines of his is, "Death ends a life, not a relationship." And I'm here, and hopefully some of the stories I can share tonight are about those relationships that we continue to have, even after the soul has left the body.
In about 1992, no, it was before that. It was in the late 80s, it was about 88, and I studied with Anne Brenner at Kala. And I was in a class with Rabbi Jack Gabriel, and I'm forever a student of Chevra Kadesha. That's all I can really say. When I came back to Boulder with this vision, I remember Rabbi Yaakov Gabriel and I came up to Fort Collins, and I came to Boulder, and we were just lit with this a directive that we had to begin a Chevra Kadesha. And no one had died in Jewish renewal community of Boulder yet. We were a very young community. This is in the late 80s, and we had never gone through a death. But it was like this very strong bat kol voice in me, like an urge, just an urgency. And I remember calling. This is right before Ruth came. This is so far back. It's even before you came to town. I had a group in my living room at home, and I passed on the manual, I passed on the training as I had learned it from Anne Brenner, and within a few days we had a death. And it was actually the death of a child. It was the death of a 10-year-old boy, and it was critical that we were on tap. So ever since then, I've been a devoted student of this work because I need it so badly. My neshama needs it. And we're going to talk about that more tonight. Why do we have this kind of attraction, this magnetism to this work, and why is it so important for the soul, for the growth of the soul? So I think we'll continue with that.
Do you want to start?
Sure, I'll start with a story that's just popping to mind, and it's fetching at me, so I'm gonna, what I have to say is really not stories, but this is a story that Reb Zalman told me once, and I never forgot it. And I don't remember the Rebbe. It was a Hasidic master. Maybe Michael or somebody knows. I bet if Maury was here, he would know. But maybe you're not, who knows. So there's a Hasidic master, and he has a person who comes to him and is draining him a cup. He was just messing with him, like keep asking questions, and the rabbi finally says, "Mutl, you're not even in this world. What are you doing?" And he said, "What do you mean I'm not in this world? I'm right here. I'm right before you." He says, "Pick up your kapata." And he picks up his frock, his long silk black coat, and he sees underneath it his tachrichim, his death shroud. He says, "You see, you have to understand, you are no longer in this world, now go. Go to the world to which you belong." Now, all this while, one of the Hasidim was watching this and is like astonished, and he's so disturbed, he's disconcerted. He says, Rebbe, how do we know? How will we ever know what world we're in? How do we know? How do I know? Am I a butterfly dreaming, or am I how do we know that we're really alive or not? Or we're just ghosts in this world? He says, the world in which you ask that question is the real world. If you find yourself asking the question, you're alive. It's only when you're not asking the question you need to pick up your kapata and look and see that. So that's apropos of nothing, but I wanted, but it's a really good teaching story to understand that We are so alive after we go. And we should never, never forget that. We should never, when we're working with people who are on their way, when we're working with people who have just recently passed, when we're working with a Shiva house, when we're visiting, and when we are sitting in mourning, when we're bringing food, we should never forget that the neshama is there looking and searching and needing in need. So that's where I want to start my talk tonight, with your permission. It's not really, when I went inside to contemplate what I needed to bring, two things came. One is a word and one is a phrase. So the word that I want to bring is levaya. Levaya, with all due respect to the Israelis in the room, levaya means accompaniment, to accompany someone, right? And it's used in our tradition as the word for a funeral. Because why? Because when we are holding the beer, when we're holding, we're accompanying the person to their grave, to their final resting place, right? So accompaniment, the Israelis in here, is that a good word? Levaya means accompaniment or accompaniment. Levaya. Levaya. Okay. So I was raised with, we're going to a levaya. We're going to a levaya today. We're going to a funeral. And it's a very, very big mitzvah to go to a levaya. But as those of you who have done the work of Chevra Kadesha know, and of those of you who have taught and studied doula work, when we are doing the work, from the moment a person understands that he or she, let's say, has a terminal diagnosis, or that they're in the dying throes of death, they're in the dying phase. We all are dying. I want to say that, but really close, and the Malach HaMavet is on his way, and we know that, the angel of death. We feel that, and we're given warnings. The Zohar teaches that we're given warnings, and we're given all kinds of simanim. For instance, we lose our shadow. We don't have a shadow for 30 days before we go. We start having dreams. There are things that start to happen. From that moment on to the time when we're on our deathbed, and to the moment when we pass, and to the moment when we as Chevra Kadesha are tending and holding the family, or bringing food, or in the Shiva house, we're accompanying. We are doing the work of levaya the whole time through. And we're doing the work of accompanying the soul. And it's really important to remember that I want to say, it's like a little ridiculous to say, there's a living neshama that's in the field. And it's really important to know that. And many of you know that so deeply. So all that while, it's important to remember that there can be a disorientation, and there can be a fear, and there can be a loneliness that even after a person dies, you feel this in the Tahara room. You can feel this sense of like confusion or unrest, or you can feel a fluttering, a panicky feeling in the Tahara room or in the Shmira room. You can feel a sense of deep loneliness, like what do I do now? I'm alone. And it's so important to trust. One of the things I want to say so strongly tonight is that we trust our instincts, because there's no two deaths that are alike. And if you really, some of you I know are so tuned into their chush about it, their sensibility about it. There's no, in a shmira room, there's no two shmiras that are alike. There's no two taras that are alike. And so trust your instincts. Sometimes people are very peaceful, and sometimes there's this sense that, so I want to say, I feel this from such a, could I prove it? Is it evidence-based? No. But I feel so deeply, and I feel like I know so deeply that there is a need for accompaniment, for talking to a person all the way throughout. Many of you do this already, to speak to the person. Obviously, we're not speaking to a body, we're speaking to someone who is already in their aron, in the shmira room, or someone who is on the table as we're washing them, to say, oh, you did such a beautiful job in your life. Let's look at these hands. Let's look at this this belly. Look at these feet and what the mitzvot that you did. And you just know you did such a lovely job. It's time, you're done here now. You're done. And it's time to move on. And so to recount, if you can, anything you know about the Met, about the person, and to let them know, it's time to move on. Now you're going back to your family now. You're going back home. And it's really okay. So levaya, very important. And I got that word so strongly. Accompany the person all the way to the very end. Even at the Shiva house. They're sometimes even there in the house of mourning. The soul is casting about, waiting for some word of comfort, some okay, that it's all right to really move on, and it's really okay, we'll be okay here. So talk to the person. Don't think you're crazy to do that. And also, some people will ask you, what can I do? People ask me all the time, like, what should I tell this person? Family is bereft. Talk to them. I know it's a little irrational. Talk to them. Just accompany them on the way to the very moment when you're walking down the block, walking with the family down the block. Do you know that minhag where you're accompanying the family to the end of the block and then you're escorting them home? They are doing a levaya for the soul of their beloved and saying, this is as far as I can go now. So now you go back. You go back home. I'm going to go back to my physical home, and you go back to your spiritual home now. Okay, so that's the first word, levaya. And the second one is coming up in a couple of 3 weeks at Shabbos Para. This one, again, this is a little on the edge, so I'm just going to give you a little caveat ahead of time. This has to do with what came into my mind so strongly is that our work as Chevra Kadesha, doing these death rites, these sacred rites, is like, has the same power for us as the ashes of the Para Aduma. Now, what is the Para Aduma? The Para Aduma, very quickly, is does anyone want to say?
The red heifer.
This is the red heifer. And the red heifer is a shamanic rite, I would say. It's a mythical animal in our tradition. It has to be absolutely perfect without blemish. It is given as a sacrifice. It is burned into an ash, and those ashes have a magical quality, and those ashes have the magical quality of metaher tmeim and metameh tahorim. So it's like this alchemical thing. It purifies blemish, it purifies impurity, and it also can confuse that which is innocent and blemishless. Okay, so let me, I said, oh no, please don't make me say this. But it was like it kept coming back and back and back, so I'm going to say what I was told to say. So when the work of Chevra Kadesha is a lot like this. Like the ashes of this mysterious red heifer, this perfect animal. It had to be perfect without any blemish, and that's why it was pretty mythical and rare. So what does the work of Chevra Kadesha do? When we come, and this happened to me just last week, and I walk in, I think I know who I am, I think I know what I'm about, I think I know, I'm just putting in a tara between this and that, right? It's like, no, Tirza, like, get here. Really get here. Get radically here. And all the chitzoniyut, what I call chitzoniyut, all the like kind of, absorption into the outer world, into outer images, into superficiality, into surface life, into who I think I am, and all the stories I have about myself, all that's, the Hasidic rabbis would call that chitzoniyut, it's the externals of life. And boom, it's like a klop that the Zen Roshi gives you whomp on your back, and you're sitting Zen, and it's like you just get a whack, right? You know about that, you just get a whack, and it's like, okay, so like, wake up. It's just a wake-up call, and it purifies, it so deeply purifies the tuma, the impurity of all the shtut, all the shtus all the stuff that we are carrying, like in our head, I talk about myself, just the quacking, all the stuff that I think I know, and all this It brings me down into silence. It brings me down into now. It brings me into radical immediacy. And so it purifies. It purifies our bruised and pitted awareness. It purifies our blemished thinking and our scarred views of ourselves. To sit with Ahmed and Shmira, it's impossible not to think, this could be me. This is me. It's impossible to be in a Tara and cleansing Ahmed and not to think, what is it going to be like? When I'm being washed, God willing, there's going to be a Chevra Kadesha. What is it going to be like when my arm is raised, and where am I going to be? And immediately, it's like this ash of purification, this shamanic ash, or this water is poured over us to cleanse us, to cleanse our consciousness of Chitzon. But the other half of it is much harder. I know you all understand what I'm saying so far, but it also is metameh tahorim. What does it mean that these mythical alchemical ashes also, they create, what does it mean, metameh? It defiles or it confuses those who come with pure, innocent, overly innocent mind state. Those who are not prepared, beware. It can be a confounder. It can stir up shadow. It can muddy our pure waters of who, sort of, I have my reality neatly arranged, right? I think I know everything is neatly arranged, and then boom. It can be very distressing. And I know those of you who have been doing this, really, you're Avdei Hashem, you're Avdei Kodesh, you're servants of the Most High, those of you who are doing this work. And sometimes we leave a very distressing death of a young person or a person who's offered their organs, for instance, or we've had these very distressing deaths. And we leave very muddied. Our waters, our pure mind, our innocent selves are muddied. And that's when, and that's why we need each other. That's why we need Chevra Kadesha. That's why we need leaders. That's why we need Chevra and colleagues to sit in, to debrief after a Tara, to sit and call each other. It's why we need the circle, this holy circle. It's why we need Zayin Adar. It's why we need this day, because we know that this month, if it's not the 7th of Adar, like Jason was saying, it's sometime in this month that all over the world, the Chevra Kadeshas, these sacred societies are meeting and working through this difficult spiritual practice. This is the highest spiritual practice. And it is like that whack, it is that wake-up call that is purifying, but can be very disturbing as well. So there's a shadow component, and we shouldn't think that it's all like golden. And I'm doing this work, and sometimes we have dreams, and sometimes we go to bed and we know we need to go back and take another shower, or we need to go talk to someone. It's really important to say this out loud. It's not all so tidy, right? So I want to give everyone a bracha. I'm going to turn this finally over to Reb Nadia, and just say that this is powerful work. It's the most powerful work that anyone could do. It helps us prepare for our own death. It helps us have infinite compassion for one another and for each other's limitations and for our own. It's such a zchut, it's such an honor and a merit to be doing this work. And I want to deeply bow to each one of you who are engaged in this work, and particularly the leaders of the Chevra, and who are keeping us together. And if you are, I want to reiterate what Jason said, or what Ruth said, if you are moved to give even if it's just a small bill tonight, do that, because it elevates another soul. You can give in the name of someone who you felt was in distress when you purified or watched over them. You can give in the name of one of your ancestors, someone who has died in your family, a relative. You can give for your own soul, for the sake of your own soul. And that is going to go very, very far, and is going to be used very, very well. So I want to deep bow to all of you, and then pass the torch mic on to my colleague, Rabbi Adam. Thank you.
Thank you. So I am going to sit because my paper's a little heavier than having young adult children teaching me to stop making copies of things and carry it in. I'm still getting used to this idea. So I want to begin first by thanking you so much for starting this Chevra Kadesha here in this city. Because really my story, as I said before, starts with my father's death. When my father died 35 years ago in Southern California, there was no such thing as a community Chevra Kadesha. And the conservative congregation that my parents were members of and that I was originally trained in, they had wonderful support for families and for the Shiva and all the rest of that, but nothing for death and burial. The rabbi took care of the burial, but anything that was going to come before that, we had to reach out to the Orthodox Chevra Kadesha in town. And so when my father died, Victor and I reached out immediately to the Chevra Kadesha to arrange for Tahara and Shmira. They were willing to come and do Tahara, but they wouldn't provide what was called the Tehillim Bacher. You know, the guy who's going to sit and read Tehillim for Shmira throughout the time until the burial, because we weren't of their community. They couldn't imagine that it would have any value to us. Us, not us specifically, but us, the general, more liberal community. So they didn't provide that. And the congregation wasn't set up, it was before a time that many of the liberal congregations were learning to take care of these things amongst themselves. So as I said, they were really set up for everything. From the moment we went to the cemetery, they moved into my parents' house and they covered the mirrors and they brought in the food and they put the water at the front door. They did all that stuff. They knew how to do that, but nothing before that. So there we were. Tahara was going to be performed in the early afternoon, and the burial was set for late morning or early afternoon the next day. And I wasn't about to have my father's body left unattended. So in those days, I was a principal of a Hebrew day school in Los Angeles, and there was a young, beautiful, sweet, young Orthodox man who taught in my school, who was a student at Yeshiva University. I knew if I called him and asked him to go and sit with my father, he wouldn't say no. And that's what I did. And I arranged for him to get out of his class in Yeshiva University in Los Angeles and schlep all the way down to Orange County. It's a bit of a schlep. And he did that out of kavod and love, and was there when the Tahara ended and was prepared to be there and actually accompanied the Aron to the burial place. So you have no idea what an incredible gift you are, all of you, and what a gift Reb Tirza brought to this community by creating something that makes it possible not only for every family to be served in the way that they deserve and want and need to be served, but that gives all of us an opportunity, all of you an opportunity to learn this incredible sacred practice and participate in it. So we knew when the Tahara was going to take place, and Victor, my husband, went and said that he wanted to be there. They wouldn't let him participate. But he wanted to be there, and he brought my father's talit so that they would wrap him in his talit after the Tahara was complete. And he really went with the task of making sure that my father's neshama knew that we were okay. My father died when he was young. He was 49 years old. Oh. And some of his last, concerns that he expressed to me was he was ready to die by the time he died. He died of cancer, but he was really concerned that we weren't going to be okay. And as much as I promised my father that I would be okay, the words were right, but inside, of course, I was screaming, how can you be okay dying when you're abandoning me? So Victor went really to tell my father that we were going to be okay, and he was going to see to it that we were going to be okay. And he sat there the entire time through the Tahara, as Rabbi Tirza was telling you, talking to my father's neshama, promising him that we were really all okay and that he had permission to go. I went to the mortuary the following morning to bring breakfast to this young man who had sat up through the entire night with my father's body. And I had told him all he needed was, he needed an hour to have breakfast and to daven. So he had to leave that space in order that he could be able to daven. And I said I would sit in the room. I'd never done this before. I had no idea what I was doing. I just knew that we couldn't leave my father alone. So Danny was the name of the young man. He came out. I gave him food that I'd prepared for him, and he went off to daven and to have something to eat. And I went and sat in the room, and my Abba's neshama was so present, was so palpable. And all I could do was just cry to him. But I had, in that hour plus that I sat there, such an incredible opportunity to speak to my father and to receive comfort from him. Because he'd already been assured that I was going to be okay. So now when I came to reassure him again, he didn't need to hear that from me. It was very clear to me that now he just wanted to offer me that last hug. And I really sat there, felt completely enveloped by my father for an hour, and cried and let go and let him go. Because when he'd asked me to let him go 2 days before he died, I said the right words, but I wasn't with it. And in that hour, I was able to really let him go and to feel the comfort that we had given him and the permission that we had given him to leave. That was my first introduction. Years later, a very dear friend of ours in our community died. He was my husband, was Victor's best friend. And by now, Victor had a reputation in the Los Angeles Jewish community, and still it was the Orthodox who did the tahara, but now they knew him and he could be a little bit pushy, and he called the Chevra Kadesha and he said he was coming and he was going to bring a team to perform tahara for this man. We had been there at his bedside when he died, and he'd actually waited for us to arrive. This was so many years after my father's death that by now we had moved to Northern California. He'd been part of our congregation in Southern California, but we drove back through the night to be there the night that he died. So he really waited for us. He died moments after we walked through the door, after he knew we were there and we had all kissed him goodbye. But he'd also been waiting for his wife's parents to arrive, his mother-in-law and father-in-law, who loved him dearly, and he was very, very close with them. He himself was an orphan, he was a Holocaust survivor, and survived as a child. And they didn't make it in time. So Victor was determined that they would get there, and because we have learned that being present at the tahara and being able to speak to the Met and comfort them and reassure them is a really important part of the process. More even for Victor than the specifics of doing the knots right. So the father-in-law is not Jewish. And some of you will remember years ago when Victor said it's okay for non-Jews to participate in the tahara. It was sourced in a personal experience. The father-in-law was not a Jew. He loved this man, and he had great respect for Yiddishkeit. He grew up, he raised a Jewish family of children with a Jewish wife. And he went along with Victor. Victor told him, you don't say a word, we're just going to do what I'm telling you. They're going to trust me because I'm the rabbi, and we're going to do the tahara. When he came back, Costa, he's a Greek man, he came back to the house after they performed this tahara, and he was able to tell us that he had been able to say goodbye to Otto, his son-in-law, in a real way, something he'd never experienced before in his life. He said, I walked into that room and it was so filled with his spirit. There was a body on the table that was a shell of a man whom I had loved for so many years. But the spirit was so alive in that space that I was able to say goodbye to him and reassure him that we were there to accompany him to his final resting place. These two experiences were like such mirror experiences for me that I was so ready to be part of that kind of process. And had my first opportunity when we finally moved to Berkeley, California, where there was and is a wonderful community, Chevra Kadesha. And not too long after our arrival, the mother of a friend of mine in the congregation, actually the woman who was really responsible for bringing us to that congregation, very, very amazing woman, died. I had not met the mother. She lived in San Francisco. We were in Berkeley. She'd been ill for all the time that I'd been there. But the daughter, my friend, called me and said, I need you to come and be part of this tahara. So first she told me that when her mother died, she sat with her mother's body for 3 hours, and while the body was not breathing, the hara, her life force, was still very, very present. And she wasn't able to leave her because she could see the movement, right? In the ethereal body, in the hara it's called in the Eastern traditions. And she could see it so clearly that she couldn't leave her mother, and she wouldn't allow them to cover her completely. And she was sitting with her and singing to her and speaking to her. And it was only when that stilled that she allowed them to then cover her mother completely and remove her. And she prepared for us to arrive to perform the tahara. So I walked into this room. I had never met this woman. And she pulled me into the room. I could feel her welcome and her gratitude that I was there, because her daughter had told her a lot about me and knew that she really wanted me to be there so that she would have the courage to go through this process. Now, this was a daughter participating in tahara, which I would never recommend after having had that experience, but she insisted. And if you knew this woman, you'd understand that there was no telling her she couldn't do it. So my experience, though, that night was of falling in love with this woman whom I had never known. And I'm sure that you've all had that experience in the tahara room. You walk in and you've never met the person, and you maybe know a name, and maybe a few things were told to you about that person's life outside to prepare you to come in and meet this person with grace and with love. And in the course of caring for that body, that temple that made it possible for that soul to come into this realm and do the work that it had to do, you just fall in love. You fall in love. And so what I was called to do, besides loving her and singing to her throughout the entire tahara, we were just singing a nigun and loving every part of her. I also felt called, because I could see that there was a way to accompany the neshama up to the veil, to show her the way, to open that channel to the light. I'd had way too many experiences with souls that didn't know they were dead and clung to people and had not made their transition. And so we, together with our song and our intention and our open hearts, we all of us accompanied that neshama right to the gate and gave her permission to pass through. Now I know that our tradition teaches us that there's that 7-day period, it's called chibut hakever, that 7 days, that's why we sit Shiva, and that the soul is going back and forth between the burial place and the Shiva house, mourning the body. And I believe that for some that's true. Some have a really difficult time separating from the body, separating from the life. And I also believe that when we perform tahara with that kind of love and that kind of intention, first of all, we allow the neshama to understand what it means to no longer be in the body. Okay? We give them permission to separate. That washing that we do, the washing away of the dross of the lifetime, gives permission for a clean break, a a clean break, a real separation. And when we take those moments following the Tahara to open with our heart's intention and with our love, to open that channel and to follow the neshama as far as we are given permission to go, and bid them farewell at the gate, and ask them, to come back in our dreams, tell us what it's like. Give them permission to go with that sense of curiosity of our own, so that they don't have to feel that they have to hang on and take care of the people who are left behind. And that to me is one of the most important tasks that sort of closes the Tahara before we place the lid on the Aron, or before we complete the whole process, to take those moments to really show them the way and invite them to go on that journey joyfully, with great anticipation, and to say, we'll be waiting in our dreams to hear how beautiful it is. So to me, that's the finest gift that we give the souls in those final moments. There's so many stories I could tell, but I think I'm going to open it back to Jesus.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, hearing each other speak, is there anything that arose that you want to? Hearing each other. Is there anything that arose for either of you that you want to respond to from each other's remarks? And I think it's really okay to also speak to each other in front of us. I think one of the things that's so beautiful is just how you think, Tirtha. And so much of what I hear you each talking about is that there's a relationship that's still happening. Whether this was like going to a massage, or there's a mutuality between the neshama and the Chevra Kadesha team. So if you have any responses to each other at all.
No, just yes. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think that we can open it up for questions. I'll walk around and hand you the mic.
Yes. Thank you. I'm so touched. I felt like I was in each situation, both of you. And I guess I have a deep, but a simple, but it feels like a very deep question about something that you said, Reb Nadia, about sometimes we know. It's almost like the soul hasn't caught up to the body after the soul has left. And you said it in a very poignant way, and I wonder if you could speak a little bit about that catch-up, or what our role as Chevra Kadesha participants can be.
Well, I'll say, and Reb Tirtha spoke to this also, every death is its own unique experience. Every Tahara is its own experience. Every loss is its own experience. And so there are those in the process of dying who are ready, and they're ready to leave the body, right? And death comes as a release and a relief and joy, pure joy. And there are those who are not ready for all varieties of reasons. Right? Unfinished business, or a sudden death that was unanticipated. They had no time to get used to the idea, right? And I think the hardest stuff is the spiritual pains that don't get healed by the end of life. A sense of not knowing if one's life has been a life really filled with meaning, whether one's life had any real purpose, if there's unforgiveness in the field, in relationships, if there's, those kinds of things which make it are just impediments to a good death, to a positive kind of leave-taking. And in many of those circumstances, then the soul has a really hard time getting used to the idea that it's dead. And in some cases, misses the opportunity to really be called into the light, so to speak, to make that transition to that other plane of existence, so that there's some aspect of if we think about it in terms of the Kabbalistic levels of soul, it would mean that some aspect of the nefesh and the ruach just don't get absorbed into those higher levels of soul and make a clean break and a clean transition. And then they need help. There are, I'm sure in this room, people who do that work, right? Who are able to sense those souls and help them lead. And then it's a matter of comforting them and the stories that Rabbi Tirza was saying, of telling them the good that they did, right? The meaning that they had, the people who love them and are inspired by them. Those are the kinds of things that we can often do to help them leave well.
Yeah, thank you. I would just add, the famous story. There's such famous stories about this because, people have been working on this since time began, how to die well. And we have the Hasidic Rebbe whose wife, and I believe this may have been Zusia of Hanipol, whose wife was just bereft, just crying. And he was so upset, and he said, "Stop, don't you know that I have been preparing for this time my whole life? I've been preparing for my, and that's really that little conversation, that little snippet is so revealing about the spiritual initiate's approach to death. It's what Reb Zalman brought to us and what Reb Nadia and Reb Ori are doing. It's not the aging to saging work, it's what you do. It's like, what many of us in the community are doing is helping people turn the corner of our transitions and really fully harvest where we've come from and where we're going to. And all of that work that we're so lucky to have. And Reb Zalman, I want to give him such kavod because may his blessing, may his memory be a continuous unfolding blessing to us. So many of us take this for granted, but it's not. It really isn't. There's another teaching in the Talmud where, just like what you said, come in a dream. Tell us what it's like on the other side, because from time immemorial, it's a great mystery. We don't really know what it's like. Tell us. And the dream, this is a Talmudic story, that he comes back and says to his friend and says, it's so easy. It's like removing a hair from a pitcher of milk. That's how easy death is. But oy vavoy, going up to that point is the worst. So it's like preparing the ego, knowing that it's going to die, can be terrifying. But the death itself, and I think about how Reb Zalman Zachron Livracha left this world, he gave us so much preparation. He gave us so many teachings. By the time he was 60 years old, when he started developing aging to saging, and he died at 89, so 29 years was that whole Tekufah that he started coming around to Boulder and teaching these things, into Denver, teaching these, how do we do this work? So now we have those teachings, and so it's much easier to catch up. I think those horrible chibut ha-kever, like the terrible slingshot and the disorientation that the rabbis teach about, and the terrible bardos and all that scary stuff are really about people who, it's true, it can be so, if you've identified with your body and you're 70 years old and you've never known that you're more than this, it can be very, very, very painful. It's a lot of, if you've never done, if we've never really done the serious spiritual work of disidentifying from our corporal body and from our stories, then it can be really, really disorienting. So we don't know. So anyway, as Chevra Kadesha, you meet a person wherever they were, and you, with great compassion, and talk to them there.
So if I may add one more story, and this is actually a story that you play a role in, and also by way of a little plug. So, what Tirsa's talking about is the preparation. All of us need to prepare for the end of our lives and do the work that it's going to take so that we can, whenever it comes, feel complete and ready. Not that anybody wants to die, but that sense of knowing that you can, and it can be, and your life can be complete at any moment. We do these trainings, and in fact, Reb Ori is going to be leading a week-long urban retreat on death as a part of life, which is a program that is part of the olive saging work that helps each one of us come to terms with our mortality, not just to prepare for dying, but to really live fully the life that we have. And one of the things that I began to do many, many years ago with the end-of-life doula training was to teach people to write their own vidui, their own deathbed confession. You know, we have a traditional deathbed confession that is supposed to be spoken on the deathbed or on your behalf by a rabbi or a chaplain or somebody if you're already not able to speak yourself. And I had found as a rabbi in the early years that this thing was meaningless to dying people. I wanted it to have meaning, to have some, you know, some. So I developed a way of writing one's own vidui, and it was a way of really articulating the meaning of the life that you've lived, being able to be presented at the threshold, so to speak, was the way I taught it. You're going to be presented at the threshold. These are the words that are going to be read on your behalf as you cross over into the next realm. How do you want to be presented? To whom are you being presented? What are the things that you want known about you? What are the regrets and the sad things that you're leaving behind that you want acknowledged? Those kinds of things we would write in the vidui. So, a beloved member of our community, who many of you knew, Davida Kale, when she was dying of ALS, contacted me through email, because of course she couldn't speak for the last long period of her life, and asked and told me that, I guess Reb Zalman told her that I did this thing, and would I come and help her write her vidui. So I went and I spent a few hours with her over a period of some days. I gave her examples, I taught her about it, we talked back and forth with her little talking machine about the things that she might include, and then she wrote a magnificent vidui. Magnificent. Which she sent to me on email, and also told me that she was going to share it with her Chavurah. That Friday night was going to be the last time the Chavurah was coming to celebrate Shabbat in her home, and she shared her vidui with everyone. It was gorgeous. That was a couple months before her death. Just before Rosh Hashanah, we knew that she wasn't going to live through the Chagim, and Victor and I wanted to see her one last time, and so we contacted her family and we arranged to come and say goodbye to her. It was the day before Erev Rosh Hashanah. Okay? That was the day that she died. We arranged to come and see her, and we went up to her room, and both of us were sitting with her, and she was very agitated. Her daughter read it as anxiety and wanted to give her a little more Ativan. They were, treating her as we do in hospice care appropriately. But I had a really strong sense that there was something she was trying to tell me. Couldn't figure it out. What was she trying to tell me? She was clutching at me. And so I got really still and I listened carefully. And I got that she needed to hear her vidui, because when we wrote it together, I had promised her that this would be read as she was dying. So I said to her in her ear, I said, "We'll get your vidui read." And I kissed her goodbye. And we went downstairs, and the family was there, and I said to them as we were saying goodbye, I said, "Did you have an agreement with Davida about reading her vidui?" And they said, "Well, she read it to us, she shared it with us." I said, "Yes, but it's supposed to be read to her before she dies." And they said, "Well, when should we do that?" I said, "Well, I think that's up to you, but I wouldn't wait too long." So early the next morning, I had a call from her brother to tell me that she had died in the early hours of the morning, but he also shared with me that they had waited that afternoon and evening until Tirza arrived to say goodbye. And that made the family complete for them to have Reb Tirza with them, and her mother and her brother and her daughters and her husband. And they sat around, the way it was described to me was they sat around her bed and they passed the vidui hand to hand, and each one read a paragraph in turn of the vidui. And the way he told it to me was after they finished reading it, for the first time that day, she got completely calm. And she was calm until she took her final breath. some hours later. So these are the things that we're talking about, this kind of preparation that we can do ourselves, for ourselves, and not wait for the Chevra Kadesha to have to figure out what's the right thing to do for us. Though, of course, then we also have the privilege of continuing that work in the Tahara and the Shmirah. That was such a validation for me of something that I've been teaching by instinct and how it really worked.
About your preparation before you go in, you had mentioned, Reb Tirza, that you have to get really here, and there's a lot of things pulling at us in our daily lives. So how about some words of wisdom about your preparation, and then also afterwards, because I find I need a lot of time afterwards for all sorts of different things.
Good question. It's a really good question. The truth is that I could say a lot of fancy things, but a lot of times we're flying by the seat of our pants, and we just hear there's a Tara, and we just yell to our husbands or our partners or our kids, "Get dinner, I'm out of here," and we're flying there, and we don't, a lot of times we are called into presence by the elevator doors opening up, or not opening up. Sometimes they don't open up. We just had that experience. They open up in the wrong place. Or when we're on our way, we start to hear a nigun in our head, and we start to sing a little song, or just seeing each other. I think that's why, for me, and I would be embarrassed to tell you all the ways that I've flown in from who knows, God knows where, to do the holiest work. And the work makes me holy, and the work brings me into presence. And that's part of why many of us do it. That's why I do it, is, to just come into total presence. The Met, that's one of the big gifts of this work, and the big gift that the Met gives us. But it's also when we see our colleagues in the antechamber, or before we go into the Shmira room, where we see people, we see our Tara, Chevra, sort of circling up with them, is a very deep moment where you can breathe together. And I don't think that happens in every Chevra Kadesha. I've seen also, like you, before we got it together, we would have to call the Denver Chevra Kadesha, and I would have to sit outside because I wasn't completely Shomer Shabbos, and they didn't trust that I was kosher enough to no fault. I mean, that's what their training is, but I think that many of us, that we're doing some practices like circling up, holding hands, asking really a deep mechila and talking to the person and singing, and all these practices that we do in the Tara room and that we do in the Shmira room are things that aren't universal, and don't take them for granted. These are very special. Just to have each other and to have the Rosh. I remember, I want to give some kavod to Sharna, who, after the last Tara, said, "Okay, let's everyone just look inside and see, is there anything that you're taking home that you need to not, that you need to let go of? Are you okay? Do we need to debrief? Do we need to?" And she was really, really sensitive. I know the men debrief every time they go up to the conference room and debrief. These are things that we can do with each other, and they bring us into awareness and consciousness, and thank God we have each other. That's all I want to say. That's probably the biggest help. Afterwards, and I know Rabbi will add to it, take off all your clothes, and no matter what you're wearing, just peel off and put them right into the wash, go right into the shower. Sometimes I've talked myself into, no, I'm too busy, I have a bar mitzvah tomorrow, I have to prepare, whatever it is. Every time I have not done that, and I have not done a real tara on myself with water, and really, or I've been flying into the house and taking something to eat, I've paid for it. It's really, really, really important to do the work of cleansing oneself after handling the death, because again, it's metameh tahurim. It has a clinging, can have a clinging character to it, element to it. Yeah, thank you.
And the only thing that I would add from my personal practice is that I always call on others, my family on the other side, to come and be with me. To be with me first, to guide me so that I don't overstep or misstep or do something that would be disruptive to the process that the neshama is going through, and also to be there to help comfort on the other side, to sort of welcome and make sure. I mean, I used to be just my father. Now it's my grandparents, and who also joined him there. That I ask them to make sure that the right people for this met are waiting right there at the gate, and to make sure that they're there and to help bring comfort and invite them into the celebration in the heichal, in the palace that they're entering into. So for me, that's a very conscious practice, and just by getting in touch with my father's neshama and my savta, my grandmother, and others, that puts me in a different space. When I call them in and I open that channel of communication for myself, it puts me in a space where I also feel that I have greater access to the neshama of the person that I'm sitting with or washing. And yes, it's so important to do a complete havdalah when you get home. So important. And I've even had at times, Victor or someone else brush out my field, around me, even after I've washed everything. Sometimes I feel like I've carried more home than I should.
I have a question regarding putting on clothes, as the men have, on a few occasions, at least 3 occasions, have been asked to put on the street clothes of the men. And besides the fact that it doesn't follow our tradition, I find it very abusive and disconcerting to handle the body that way. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are about that, and is that really proper for us to do as Chevra Kadeshas, to put back on the street clothes?
Briefly, thank you for that really important question, because we have had that come up in the Chevra several times now. To the person who asks for it or to the family, they're not street clothes. They're probably special clothes. What I have, in other words, they're not just, something they wear to clean the house or something. They're probably special. In all the cases that I've seen, it's a special dress. It might be a wedding dress. It might be I had that once. There was I wanted you to, put my father in this special suit. So it's usually clothes that are imbued with feeling, but we don't know what that feeling is. And so we always want to respect that. And actually, I have to say, this is just personal self-disclosure. After our last time, I went home to David and I said, we have to get the tachrichim. They're and this is in the Talmud, that everybody gets buried in the same tachrich, in the same shroud. But the tachrichim that we get, you might be a tiny little size 4 woman, everyone wears the same tachrichim, which is an extra large. And it's so I just want to say, and what I said to him is, we need to get our tachrichim, because you can have your own tachrichim made with the kavanah of, this is what I'm going to wear. So, for instance, if you have a kittel, if you have a talit, there are certain marks that you have to make on it to make it a non-kosher talit anymore. You cut the strings, the tzitziot. But it's really okay to err a little bit from these super duper outsized these monster clothes which are very beautiful, and we want to be in keeping with the
simplicity,
with the value of the rabbis, which is that it doesn't matter how wealthy you are, how important you are, how famous you are, everyone at the end is buried in the same. But nevertheless, sometimes those ginormous clothes can feel almost a little clown-like. So I personally think that it's absolutely okay. And maybe we should have a discussion about what it is, maybe amongst the Chevra, not for tonight, but what it is that feels like, you said abusive or offensive?
To the body.
To the body. Okay, you mean to push the body back into a...
Yes, that movement.
Yes.
It's just so jarring, and I just think it is offensive.
Yeah, it may be, like I would say, I would just remember that for the person, it's probably something special that they're being dressed in. It's probably not something that is, it may be like me to get a suit on. Yeah, I can understand that. On the other hand, we want to, probably they're not coming out of, like pulling something out of the closet without having thought about it. Usually that's a family that's really thought about what daddy looked best in, or what made him feel good to wear. So I would just probably I would have you ask the family a little bit more about it. When did he wear these clothes? What did this mean to him? So that you could get into it a little bit more, because the requests of the maid are very, very important. Anyway, we can continue the discussion.
Yeah, I'm going to tell a story, another little story. We had in Los Angeles, in the Jewish cemeteries and mortuaries, there had been some kind of a terrible confusion of bodies at some point years ago, and so now they require that just before internment, someone has to identify that is in fact the right body in that box. So back in those days, before I was a rabbi, my husband was the rabbi of the congregation, and he was always the one who would go and identify the body, for members of our community. There was the death of a woman in her late 90s, and her son, who himself was in his late 60s, wanted to go with the rabbi into the back and identify his mama. And he had her dressed in this beautiful dress that she loved to wear on Yom Kippur. But Victor told me that when they opened the box and they, just the top part, and they saw that it was her, he pulled his mother's glasses out of his pocket and placed them on her face and said, "Here, Mama, you're going to need to see where you're going." Victor walked out from behind. He was just like a puddle. He was a puddle, but that beautiful moment, like there was no thought of, oh no, you don't put glasses on a man, but it was just this very special. So just to echo what Tirza here and that little.
Be it in Tahara or Shmira, of a quiet experience where you don't experience the neshama's struggle and all the details that have been described. What do we make of that experience when we don't sense either the neshama or the struggle? Is it our failing, or are there more quieter ways in which the process can unfold, and we just need to know that? So I ask for your guidance.
Or some people are just ready to go, and they're gone. And we may not really feel the presence. I've had a number of occasions where I walked into a Shmira room and thought, oh my God, where are you? Where'd you go? And then I want to be grateful and appreciative that they've already started their journey, and that this was, I will choose to interpret it as a really good death, right? And that neshama has already left. And then what I'm left with is I really am left guarding the temple of that soul. Right? So I'm still, and it's still possible to speak to the neshama. It may not be palpably present, but it doesn't mean that the neshama doesn't recognize or can't hear me when I speak out and say, you know, I bless you on your journey, and I want you to know that I'm sitting here and taking care that this sacred vessel that made your life possible is being honored in these last hours. And then that's my job, to be present and just appreciate and honor that body.
I have several questions. I'll pick one. And that is, my question is about absence. When we don't find people to be there for Shmira, what can we do, or what else is going on, or whatever? And part of my question about this has to do with a friend of mine who just died on Thursday. And, sorry, she's not part of a Jewish congregation. She arranged to be cremated, and I just don't know how to hold this. I'm sorry.
Be comforted. Deb, so you feel absent? You feel her absence? You feel blankness? What can you say a little bit more?
I'm holding her, and I feel like I'm with her, even though her body is dust now, and, you know, all the crazy things that happened. I feel like I'm sitting Shmira till her memorial service, which is next Sunday, in outside of Los Angeles.
Maybe you keep a candle lit during those days to help you. I'll keep a picture of her. This opens up a whole big can. I shouldn't say that, that's terrible. That's pretty. Let me start over. Sorry. This opens up a Pandora's box. That's not good either. Because, you know, there is something about cremation. Many of us will do cremation, and it's more and more accepted in the Jewish community and in the secular community, and it's more ecological. You know, there are many reasons why we might choose cremation, and yet there is this thing that happens with cremation that all of a sudden that person is, boom, shot out of their physical form in a very abrupt and immediate way, can be violent if they're not prepared for it. Someone who asks for cremation and has known all their life, and their parents have done, you know, it's a part of their family culture, part of their own psychic culture that they're going to do it, it can be a very peaceful thing. But for many people, and this is why I think the rabbis may have discouraged it, is that there is a kind of abruptness, that can be, all of a sudden there's absence. It's just this quality of here now, and then obliterated quite graphically. So you're then the people who love her, like you, are being asked to do the hard work of bridging between the here and the not here, and that's a lot of work to do, psychologically and spiritually, and you're doing that. And that may be part of what you're feeling right now. It's hard. It's really hard work. I guess that's all I'll say. Not did you want to say something?
No, I think. Sorry.
And there's a piece. Those of you who are doing this work, you probably know, or because you've lost a parent or you've lost a close friend, or that there is a period called aninut. It's the period between the death and the final interment. And Reb Zalman was so strong about this. As you know, Reb Zalman himself, for a while, thought that he requested to be cremated. The world was in an uproar. His family was in an uproar. They finally beseeched him to not do that. But he coached many people who were cremated, and he said, have your loved ones take part of your ashes and put them in the earth. Not to scatter, not to drop them from a plane, not to drop them on the ocean, but it can be a tablespoon. Put it in the earth and bury it. And if you still can't do that, because the family won't allow it, do it for 3 days minimum. So if you can do that, I don't know if that's even possible, but there's something, that honeymoon period between the death and the internment, when the body is at rest in Mother Earth, it can be it's so much like what you're describing, this kind of fragmented, kind of chaotic, can be, and there's something, there's a magic and a beauty and a truth and a psychological truth and healing to that, of something being put back, ashes to ashes and dust to dust. So maybe it's where you can imagine it, if you can't get hold of it.
And I think I would just add, this was your friend's choice. And, we know things and we have practices and we believe that they're right because we've learned how comforting and how right it feels to us to do that. She made this choice, and so I just really want to bless you to love her in her choice.
Beautiful.
Maria Hudas went to a funeral today, even though she has bronchitis, and she shared a little devar at the funeral, and she said that it would have been overlapped some with what she would have shared tonight, so she wrote it down instead and sent it to us. This week is the conclusion of the book of Exodus. The first part of the book describes the enslavement and liberation from Egypt, but the whole second half goes into great detail about the building of the Holy Tabernacle, which later morphed into the Temple in Jerusalem. The most sacred part of the Mishkan was the Holy of Holies, which contained the Ark of the Covenant, with the table of the Ten Commandments. Interestingly, the Hebrew word for ark, aron, is the same word we use for the burial casket. I think the link is that a person during their lifetime can be an embodiment of the Ten Commandments, which are the foundation of the Torah. There is still a deeper connection, though. The Lubavitcher Rebbe points out that our sages tell us that while King Solomon built the first temple, he knew prophetically that it would eventually be destroyed. Therefore, in contrast to the raiders of the lost ark, he built an underground location for the ark to be concealed when it had to be. The Rebbe explains the significance of this act. Even when it appears that the ark is lost, it is only lost from its revealed location. It actually has a, quote, second home in its designated hidden place. So too with each person, there's an indestructible bone called the luz bone, which retains a kista de chayuta, a trace of life, even when the person dies and is buried. Or maybe we can add yours, cremated. This bone is the contact point between body and soul, and the place where, according to the Talmud, and stem cell regeneration, the restoration of life will occur in the Messianic era. Within each heart, too, there is a Mishkan, a tabernacle, with a Holy of Holies, an immortal center which retains the energy from all the positive acts and initiatives we've taken during our lifetime, even when it seems on the surface that nothing remains. That inner spark, that eternal pilot light is still there. Therefore, all we do to watch and prepare the Met for its earthly resting place also contains a recognition that we're not only paying tribute to someone who has passed, but we're also honoring an ongoing presence.
Amen. I know it's exactly 8:30. Thank you to the leaders, and thank you to all of you who came. Reb Nadia talked about you're such a picture of wholeness to many of us in your family, and how you've made healing in your father's early death, and how you've connected the kesher between your generations in your life. For many of us, we don't have that. There are people in our families who died abruptly, and peace was never made, or they committed suicide, or they were excised from their family, or excommunicated, or various things. They died addicted, or nobody talks about them anymore, things like that. And so I just wanted to say, this is a little plug also, that on Shabbat Sav, it's a Shabbat about purification. I'm doing a workshop at my place, it's a Shabbaton, that has everything to do with healing these ancestors. It could be someone in your generation, or it could be a child, it could also be a grandparent, or someone that you know that is not at peace, and who is needing healing, so that the whole body, the whole family body, the ancestral realm can be put back in peace, and that you can get blessings from them in your life. So for me, there were, my brother, my sister, had many just aberrant kind of deaths in my family that were just uneven, and I feel the ripples of them going through from me to my daughter and when I turn to face these people and really forgive them and ask them forgiveness and ask for blessings, they're there. They're there, and there's an incredible enrichment that I have felt in my life. So I want to pass this on. So if you're interested in that workshop, let me know. And it's March 26th. It's in a few weeks. It's a Shabbat, and we'll do Shabbat. We'll do Kiddush and lunch and everything together. Keep Shabbat, but it's a very powerful piece of work that I've studied. So I want to just share that.